Colonel Melvin Deal spent 44 hours strapped into the cockpit of a B-2 stealth bomber flying from Missouri to Afghanistan and back without ever touching down. In that time, he had to eat 3 times, sleep in shifts with his co-pilot, and figure out the bathroom question on a jet that was never really built with any of that in mind. He wore the same flight suit the entire time, pulled food out of a couple of styrofoam coolers, and caught what rest he could on a thin pad behind the seats while the other pilot flew. Somewhere over the Atlantic, he did the math on the water bottle he just finished. A bottle an hour meant a bathroom trip an hour for almost 2 straight days, inside a jet that cost well over $1 billion to build, eating, sleeping, and going to the bathroom. 3 things every human being does without thinking about it, and 3 things that turn into genuine engineering and medical problems the moment a mission runs past 10 hours. Getting into how the Air Force actually handles all 3 takes you somewhere stranger than most people expect, starting with the one that sounds the simplest. Food. On a normal training flight, a fighter pilot doesn't eat at all. Those missions run 60 to 90 minutes, over before hunger is even a factor. But real missions are different. The ones built around aerial refueling over open ocean or deep into contested airspace can stretch to 6, 8, sometimes past 10 or 12 hours, with tanker rendezvous after tanker rendezvous. At that point, not eating stops being an option. The problem is the cockpit itself. An F-16's cockpit is about 19 inches wide. Barely enough room for the pilot and the controls, let alone a meal, and at 6 Gs, a pilot's arm can effectively weigh over 100 pounds, which makes lifting so much as a water bottle to your mouth a genuine physical task. So fighter pilots eat almost nothing that requires 2 hands or a fork. Energy bars. Peanut butter and honey packets squeezed straight from the foil. Small, dense, forgiving of a shaking hand. One Air Force F-16 pilot has talked about switching away from protein shakes after one exploded inside his helmet bag mid-flight, which is exactly the kind of mess nobody wants to clean up at altitude. Higher and stranger still, U-2 spy plane pilots flying missions above 70,000 feet in a full pressure suit can't remove their helmets at all. So the Air Force actually developed food in toothpaste-style tubes. Pizza, beef stroganoff, even key lime pie squeezed through a feeding port built directly into the helmet, warmed by a small heater installed in the cockpit for exactly this purpose. It's the kind of detail that sounds made up. It isn't. Sleep is where things get strange fast. In a single-seat fighter, there isn't a version of sleep available at all. No autopilot rest, no second pilot to take over, nobody watching the radar while you close your eyes. A pilot on a 12-hour combat sortie simply has to stay awake and sharp the entire time, on top of already having flown a full workday before stepping to the jet. That's where Go Pills come in. The Air Force authorizes a low dose of dextroamphetamine, 10 milligrams, for single-seat fighter missions running past 8 hours and dual-crewed bomber missions past 12. Pilots call them Go Pills. On the way back down, some pilots are prescribed a sedative, Zolpidem or Temazepam, nicknamed the no-go pill, just to be able to sleep once the mission stimulant wears off. Every pill is logged, counted, and issued by a flight surgeon. A pilot has to ground test the drug under medical supervision before it's ever cleared for use in the air, checking for a bad reaction on the ground instead of finding out for the first time at altitude. On the longest B-2 sorties, close to all of the crews flying missions with almost no in-flight rest end up using it. Take a stimulant to survive the mission. Take a sedative to survive the stimulant. Repeat on a schedule set entirely by how many hours are left on the flight plan. Multi-crew bombers get a real version of sleep that fighters never do. but only barely. On a B-2, the two-person crew plans sleep rotations weeks in advance, the same way they plan the flight path and the aerial refueling schedule. One pilot rests on a thin pad behind the seats, still wearing most of his flight gear, while the other holds the aircraft. The cabin hums with engine noise the whole time, and there's no real door, just a curtain and an understanding. Then they trade. Crew resource management, the discipline of splitting responsibility so fatigue never sits on one set of shoulders alone, is treated as seriously as the flight controls themselves. It has to be. There's no third crew member to catch a mistake if both of them are running on empty at the same time. Which brings the story back to the bathroom, the part of a 10-hour mission almost nobody pictures until they're the one strapped in, still buzzing faintly from a Go pill and running on a peanut butter packet from 3 hours ago. On a fighter, the standard fix is a piddle pack, a thick plastic bag with an absorbent sponge or powder inside, closer to what's in a diaper than anything technical. Flight suits are cut with a hidden zipper that opens from the top as well as the bottom for exactly this reason, so a pilot can reach it one-handed while the other hand stays on the stick. Use it, seal it, and a chemical inside turns the liquid to gel so it won't slosh during a hard turn. The cockpit at that point smells like recycled oxygen, hot electronics, and whatever came out of that morning's foil packet. For most pilots, it's 10 seconds and back to flying. Except it doesn't work nearly as well for everyone, and that gap sat unfixed for decades. The piddle pack was designed around a male body sitting in a male-shaped seat, built long before women were flying Air Force fighters at all. A female pilot using the same device often has to partially unstrap, shift her weight off the seat, and manage a device that was never built for her anatomy, all while still flying the jet at altitude. Some squadrons had female aviators standing up in a moving cockpit just to make the geometry work, which is exactly as risky as it sounds. One F-15E weapons systems officer has talked about how her squadron survival equipment shop swapped the zipper on her flight suit for Velcro just to make the process survivable, and how without a shop willing to build a non-standard fix, she'd have had no good option at all. She said her male backseaters could go an hour into a flight and be done in seconds. For her, the same task meant unbuckling a harness at speed and hoping the jet stayed level. Without a workaround like that, some pilots did something worse instead. They drank almost nothing before a long flight on purpose, just to avoid needing to go. That's called tactical dehydration, and it stacks directly on top of the fatigue problem from a few minutes ago. A dehydrated brain reacts slower. A sleep-deprived brain running on a Go pill is already working with a narrower margin than it should be. Put the two together on the same mission, and a pilot is managing 3 separate physiological workarounds at once: food, sleep, and bladder, on top of actually flying the jet at altitude, sometimes in combat. Bigger aircraft solve part of this, but only part. Tanker crews on a KC-135 and transport crews on a C-17 fly airframes built from old airliners, so there's usually a cramped lavatory in the back, the kind of setup a commercial flight attendant would recognize immediately, and a full crew means someone else always has the controls. Bombers sit in between. The B-52 gives each position its own relief tube wired to a central tank, plus what crews have nicknamed the honey bucket for anything more serious, a bag sealed and carried off after landing. Nobody would call it comfortable, and nobody would call it private. The B-1 does slightly better with a small toilet behind the left seat. The B-2, as Dale found out, sits at the top of the list with an actual stainless steel bowl tucked next to the microwave and the rest pad. So the hierarchy runs roughly like this. Nothing for a single-seat fighter. A tube and a bucket for the oldest bomber still flying. A cramped bowl for the newest stealth aircraft in the fleet. And a real lavatory only for the tankers and transports that were never built to fight in the first place. On paper, the B-2's setup should have solved everything for D'Ailly's crew. In practice, it didn't. He and his co-pilot were drinking roughly a bottle of water an hour to stay sharp at altitude, which meant a bathroom need roughly every hour too, for 44 hours straight, and a toilet sized for a normal sortie simply couldn't hold 2 days of output. So the two men made an agreement mid-flight. The toilet was for anything solid. Everything else went into the same piddle packs fighter pilots have used for decades, except filled with a cat litter-style absorbent so it would gel and not leak during the bomber's own long, careful descent toward the target. Here's the part that's easy to miss in a story about bags, bottles, and pills. None of it is really about comfort. Every one of these workarounds exists because getting up, unbuckling, and moving around is not something a pilot can casually do at 30,000 feet, strapped into an ejection seat built to save his life in a fraction of a second. And that constraint has, on at least one occasion, turned a bathroom break into something close to a fatal emergency. An Air Force A-10 pilot once used an in-flight relief device mid-mission and, reseating himself afterward, failed to properly refasten his parachute harness. He didn't notice the mistake until later in the flight, when he was forced to eject. A pilot who thought he was solving the most mundane problem of the entire mission ended up trusting his life to a harness he hadn't actually finished buckling. He survived. Not everyone in that position necessarily would. That single incident is a large part of why the Air Force has spent the last several years quietly funding an actual engineering fix instead of just handing out better bags. In 2022, the service awarded a contract for a device called ARIS, the Advanced In-Flight Relief Universal System, a small battery-powered pump built to work for both men and women on missions running up to 16 hours, collecting automatically into a sealed reservoir so a pilot's hands never leave the controls. A retired Air Force colonel, who later worked as a urologist, has pointed out something the old bag never solved. For men, it was awkward but workable. For women, it often meant getting undressed and standing up in a jet that was still flying. ARIS is being tested and issued unit by unit rather than fleet-wide, which means some squadrons have the new pump, while plenty of others are still working the old bag the same way pilots did decades ago. The fatigue side of the problem is being studied just as hard. Researchers at the Air Force's own fatigue lab track exactly how sleep aid use changes with a pilot's age, how effective each drug actually feels compared to how effective it measures, and which mission lengths push crews toward the pill in the first place, all with the same goal driving the piddle pack redesign. Fewer workarounds, fewer chances for one of them to go wrong at the worst possible moment. None of this makes it into recruiting videos, and none of it is the part of the job anyone imagines when they picture a fighter cockpit or a stealth bomber crossing an ocean. But ask anyone who has actually flown a 10-hour mission, and they won't talk about the missile rail or the ejection seat first. They'll talk about the peanut butter packet, the Go pill, and the piddle pack, because those are the three things that decided how well they could actually do the job that day. Every checklist, every brief, every hour of a long sortie eventually runs into the same small, unglamorous logistics that no amount of stealth coding or radar jamming technology can engineer away. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Every hour a pilot spends managing a meal, a pill schedule, or a bag is an hour of attention borrowed from an aircraft moving at hundreds of miles an hour, sometimes over hostile territory. The Air Force spends billions engineering stealth coatings and radar-evading airframes down to the smallest surface detail. But for most of the last 70 years, it left three of the most basic human needs on the airplane to a foil packet, a controlled substance, and a plastic bag. Was the discomfort worth what it cost some of those pilots in distraction, in dehydration, in at least one near-fatal mistake? It's the kind of question that never makes it into a mission brief, and it's exactly the kind this channel keeps digging into. The unglamorous, overlooked machinery of military life that never shows up in the recruiting footage. If you've ever flown a long mission yourself, or worked the flight line that keeps these jets in the air, drop it in the comments. What's the longest you ever had to hold it, stay awake, or go hungry, and what finally broke you?